Hi, I'm Tony Kent, and this is another episode of Tony Kent Writes and Cross-Examines. And today, the person who will be suffering the world's worst cross-examination is former music journalist and a highly acclaimed crime author, William Shaw. William, how are you?
I'm fine, actually. It's a beautiful day here. I'm in Brighton and it's gorgeous, so very well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure that quite a lot of people who will be watching this will know that William has already interviewed me, shoe being on the other foot, on the show that I think probably gave me the inspiration to do this, which was William's mammoth undertaking of a 4 p.m. show. I think nearly 40, wasn't it? 30 or 40?
That's right, nearly 40. I started and I did them every day at 4 p.m., every weekday at 4 p.m. And it was great. I loved doing it. It was really great, but then eventually I had to stop and write books.
Well, it was. I remember being part of it and knowing it was a mammoth undertaking. And now that I do this, I realise quite how adept you were when it comes to the technology. You were able to flip between screens and do all this. I can't even edit this. Or I can barely keep up with the timer. So I'm massively impressed. So, William, your show that you were putting out on Facebook all that time, so nearly 40 of them, that was all building to the 14th of May, wasn't it? Which was when you released your most recent book.
Well, apparently it was. I started doing this partly because I was stuck on my own and wanted to talk to crime writers, because as you know, they are the most lovely people in the world, and it's good to get out of the house in some kind of virtual way. And the moment I've done 2 or 3, my publisher said, "Oh, how clever of you to do this into the launch of your next book," which was May the 14th. And I thought, oh yeah, that was very clever of me. So it became my strategy that I had to carry on doing them till May the 14th. But it wasn't planned. I'm very bad at planning anything rational like that at all. And it just meant that I on May the 14th, I was slightly relieved I could stop them, because while it was a pleasure talking to everybody, I'd kind of begun to, every day they took more time. You know, that was the funny thing. Yeah. The early ones I could talk about anything, and then I had to prepare more and more to make sure I wasn't saying the same thing every time.
Yeah, I can understand that. Well, what I do is I'm doing four or five a day at the moment. But I did previously was I did them all over 3 days. I did about 20, I think 30 over 3 days. Wow. And that's quite a good way of doing it, because you don't really. I pretended, by the way, that they were all live, that I was making dates up and everything. But you don't say the same thing because you've already said it that day. Whereas if you've got the day between and it's 24 hours, etc., you can kind of start. You have to be very careful not to go over yourself, don't you? Not that I noticed any of that on your show at all.
Thank you.
So, Gravesend. Gravesend is the 3rd book in the Alexandra Cupidi series.
Yeah, it was. I originally the series came out of a book called The Birdwatcher, where I've been very involved in writing about bird watching, and I'd written the series partly because I wanted to include some natural history in the books as a kind of ecological kind of theme that runs through them, because I thought that was quite, something I wanted to write about, and also something I didn't necessarily know about, so I learn as I go. And so by the time it came around to this book, I really wanted to do that same sort of natural history theme again, and I was talking to people about this. I talked to a couple of animal ecologists, and I said, which species shall I do? And they both said independently badgers, because they're such a contested species. I mean, they're protected by law. You cannot do anything to a badger set or a badger without a license. And so there's interesting opportunities for crime with that. And of course, they're then related very much to housing development, which I think is also, whether it's corrupt in a conventional way or not, is one of the corrupt parts of British society. I think housing development is very, very askew where power lies in communities and what happens and why there's so much homelessness. We get told because housing isn't building fast enough, but actually it's a lot more complicated than that. And there's a lot of pressure to build on green spaces, and that I just found interesting as something to do, because that's what we do in crime fiction a lot of the time. We look for little areas like that which have stories that kind of fall out of them.
Yeah, you'll find a sort of quirk will interest you, and then you'll build a story around it.
Exactly, and it's really interesting the way it kind of mentally happens, because you start with something. Well, I do anyway, and what I've learned to say is that I can't speak for any other crime writer, because the more I speak to, the more areas everybody does things completely differently. But for me, anyway, I find a little nugget like that, and it's really interesting how stories begin to grow around it, and how that bit of the brain works between the non-fiction world and then the fictional world that we kind of imagine stuff around. And in no time at all, you've got a plot, and it's often a really terrible one. And then you spend 3 months wrestling it in some kind of shape.
And then giving it to an editor for them to wrestle it a bit more.
And then they start to cry.
I was having this conversation just last night, actually, about the editing process. And I think it's something I do another little show thing on here where it's just me talking at the screen. And I think I'm going to have to do an episode about editing, because it's such an interesting process, the way they can take these ideas we have and these stories put together, and they make them, sometimes they always make them better. Sometimes they make them work, because sometimes they're just not working. It's
an incredibly creative process, actually. And I always think that the image of writing is a solitary person in their garret, and there's only one name on the spine. But actually, whether it's friends or readers or editors, influence that whole hugely. And a really good editor with a single comment can make you flip everything about and turn something that was a bit dirty and mucky into something really shiny. And I love that process. I really, really like it. I mean, I'm always, deeply depressed when the editor points out some fundamental flaw, and I spend 48 hours crying. And then
I find myself angry about that.
Sorry?
I know that normally gets me angry, and I think the reason it gets me angry is because I always know they're going to be right. So.
Yeah, it's a terrible, terrible thing to happen. But it's definitely part of it.
So Gravesend is the third in a series, the third in the Cupidi series.
Yeah,
they're all set in Kent.
Yeah, I wanted a landscape to be part of this thing, and I live in Brighton, and I was trying to think what kind of landscape creates character, and I thought it's 50 miles away from here, Dungeness, although it takes hours to get to. But it's really
not great connections.
Yeah, it's a great landscape, and weird people live there in the best sense of weird. People with stories to tell, and people who've gone there because they're passionate about the place.
Yeah. And so, where did the idea of Cupidi come from? As a protagonist.
Well, she actually came. She was a secondary character in The Birdwatcher, and actually, weirdly enough, if anybody's read my first series, at the end of the first series, there's a baby born, and she's the baby. Timelines may vary slightly to make her be the baby, right. But in terms of when I was thinking of her as a character, I kind of knew who she was because she was the daughter of other characters in a previous series.
Well, that's interesting.
And so I kind of, so that was a ready-made character for me. Sometimes you have those characters, don't you? They're just there, and you kind of think, I know who she is, so I can write about her. And she was like that. And then when The Birdwatcher came out, in The Birdwatcher, she has to do something quite hard and quite controversial, something that doesn't make the reader like her. And I was really surprised how much negativity from the readers I got about it. So, I loved William South, who's the main character, but I hated that Cupidi. And I thought, that's interesting. I'll have that.
I'm going to make a whole series about that one.
She's clearly got something to her, so I'll take her, and I'll. Again, also, I wanted to try writing from a woman's point of view.
Well, you're a braver man than me. If I got a load of reviews back saying, you know what, I really like this guy, but that woman just hated her, she'd be gone. You're a brave man.
I've read something quite early on that I think might have been which was like, never read the good reviews on Facebook or on Goodreads or anything like that. The bad reviews are the ones that will actually give you some interesting things to say. And I think while that's a sort of ludicrously masochistic way to go about life, sometimes there's truth in it. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes those negative things. It's like when an editor, we talk about editors, says they don't like a chapter, quite often what they say about it is completely wrong. Yeah. But that gets the brain going, doesn't it? And so I think sometimes
you realise there is something wrong. It's just not what they thought it was.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Again, I had this conversation just yesterday. With reviews, I completely agree with you. I mean, positive reviews, they're great. They're an ego. They massage your ego. They're an ego trip. It's wonderful, and it's great to look at it. But actually, negative reviews, if they are well constructed and if they are honest and if they are sensible, you can learn so much from them. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you have the negative reviews that you just want to throw something at the screen.
Yeah, I'm quite lucky, I suppose, and I, that I started writing books or starting publishing books, because I've been writing books forever without, but publishing books at a time when my skin was quite thick. And I think but I think you see some younger people less experienced, and you can see them sort of dying each time somebody says something bitchy about a book, and it's like it's really important just to still believe that you it's your story, and you've got every right to tell it.
Yeah, well, you've just got to be sensible about it as well, haven't you? The reality is you're not going to write something that's going to appeal to everybody, and also, well, unless you're J.K. Rowling, it seems, and also you're going to write something, aren't you, that isn't perfect. And if someone pulls you on the imperfection, you can learn from it.
Yeah. Yes. Although those emails pointing out that you've got you know, in the third book, I had a football team called Sheffield. Now, I'm not a football fan, and that's clearly an error. And
that would not go down well. That's like saying there's a football team just like Dundee rather than Dundee United.
Yeah,
but
very bad.
It's when there's that little rivalry, isn't there, in one particular city, and it would not go down very well at all. So you mentioned the character Cupidi starting off in your first series. That was a 4-book series.
Yeah,
and that was set in the 1960s.
Yeah, I used to. Well, I still am in a writers group. And we started in 2000, and the other writer in the group is C.J. Sanson.
Right.
And so I was there while he was writing Dissolution, and we were working, you know, as a group, reading all this stuff and thinking, wow, this is brilliant. But when I'd done a couple of books with that group that hadn't got anywhere at all. And then I started writing a book set in 1968. And I thought, I can't do this. I can't write historical fiction because Chris is doing this quite successfully.
Yeah.
But I thought with that background of me being a music journalist, maybe I could write cultural fiction in a weird way, which sounds really tossy because the word cultural makes it sound pretentious. But what I meant is setting it against the cultural background of what was going on in 1968, which for me is phenomenal, all that stuff. You know, so it's a book in which you kind of see John Lennon's court case in the distance when he's being arrested for heroin possession and stuff like that. So you see the culture of the times, and that's what it's all about. It's the cultural warfare, much like we're having now, turned into a plot where the older character is in his 30s, therefore middle-aged and likes trad jazz, and the younger character is 22 and loves the Beatles. And their friction and their love for each other is based on those differences. Yeah,
and there are 4 books in that series, aren't there?
Yeah.
I think we were talking about this earlier. I fully intend to get on. Before I ran out of time, before I was supposed to speak to you, I got myself onto Amazon to try and track them down to order them, because having done a bit of research for this chap, they look absolutely brilliant. And what was about? I think we were speaking earlier on. You hopefully will write at some point. You'll write another one.
Yeah, I've started writing 2 books a year, partly to give myself some headspace from a series. Do you know what I mean? If you write, I want to write one in a different space. So I'm writing a thriller. So if had we another 15 minutes, I'd love to ask you about thriller writing. But I will come to write. I think my next thing, when I'm writing the 5th book in the Cupidi series, I'll also go and write one in the Breen Tozer series from the 1960s as well, just to keep it ticking over in my head because I love it. It's a pleasure to write.
Well, it just sounds so very different. So I mean, very, very different, and just very, very interesting. And with your experience as I'm not sure, I think we've mentioned you were a music journalist, but you were an award-winning music journalist, weren't you? You were the Amazon Music Journalist of the Year 2003. My note said. I mean, that's pretty impressive. So you're able to bring that experience into these books.
Yeah, and it's fun to do it, and it's, you know, I mean, there's a lot of nice source material from the 60s, which is great to pick up. And it's a lot of the old rock magazines from that time. It's just great to have an excuse to leaf through. I mean, I love the research for books because it's an excuse to go to places which, you know, I love doing the research because it lets me off the leash a bit, and I read all this stuff. The main thing is to not try and cram it all in there, isn't it? You know, you don't want to put everything you know in. I research in a funny way. I research after the fact. I kind of make assumptions about the way the world works, and then afterwards I go back and make sure I got them right. And if I didn't get them right, to make the change I need to make, because I am a complete inveterate know-it-all. And the more I know, the more I will cram into the book. So in order to not cram too much into the book, I have to not know when I'm writing it. That's very wise. I like that a lot. I mean, it's a tricky process, isn't it? Not letting the reader know things, but not whacking them over the head with it.
Yeah. Well, there's a scene in my first book where one of the characters runs past the statue of Achilles in Hyde Park, and it's a passing three or 4 line paragraph. It was 3 pages once. So.
No, it's lovely, and it's my whole sort of belief. I like minimalism, and I think if you use a fact, it's to help the reader build an entire world in their head through one fact.
Yes.
And if the reader knows that you know one thing, they will believe the next 100 pages, and it's just on that kind of level.
Yeah. And then also, the more facts you have in there, the more chance you're going to get one of those emails saying, actually, Sheffield United is not. Well, William, always these things just fly. We've been going for 14 minutes and 40 seconds, and rather than rush you off with only seconds to go, I'm going to take a nice leisurely time to say thank you very, very much for agreeing to come on. We'll be up on Instagram, YouTube, etc. in the next couple of days. But in the meantime, good luck with Gravesend.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Pleasure and an honour, mate.